lean over the kitchen plant after a long day and say something you would never say out loud to another person. Why are you doing this to me? Maybe you say it softly. Maybe you don't. Maybe it comes out as a full, sharp, ridiculous burst of frustration aimed at a pot of soil and leaves that has been yellowing for a week. The plant does not flinch. It does not apologize. It does not even seem to notice. And that silence is exactly why most people get this wrong. Because when a plant appears to do nothing, that does not mean nothing happened. It may mean the response is happening in a language too slow, too small, or too unfamiliar for human eyes to catch. This question lives in a strange place between joke and folklore. Some people swear plants love praise and suffer under cruelty. Others say that's nonsense, because a plant is basically furniture with metabolism. No ears, no feelings, no problem. Both reactions feel reasonable. Plants do not understand the meaning of your words. They do not feel insulted. They do not sit there replaying the argument after you leave the room. But the real answer is more interesting than either myth. When you yell at a plant, your voice does not arrive as language. It arrives as physics. Sound is movement in air. A loud human voice creates pressure waves. Up close, it also sends a brief blast of warm breath, moisture, and carbon dioxide across the leaf surface. If your hand hits the table, if the pot vibrates, if the floor shakes with your movement, that adds even more information. So the plant is not decoding your sentence. It is encountering a sudden package of mechanical and chemical change. Usually, if it happens once, the effect is probably small and temporary. One frustrated outburst is not likely to traumatize your pothos. That part is important. We do not need mystical fear around ordinary human noise. But small is not the same as meaningless. Plants evolved in a world where tiny changes in vibration can matter. A slight tremor might be wind, or rain, or the footsteps of an animal, or, more urgently, the first seconds of an insect beginning to chew. That sensitivity starts at the level of the cell. Plant cells carry mechanosensitive channels, tiny protein gates in their membranes that open when tissue is bent, stretched, pressed, or disturbed. When those gates open, ions move, calcium levels change. Electrical signals can spread through the plant. In other words, plants are built to register force. Not with ears, not with a brain, but with living tissue that is constantly asking, what just touched me, shook me, bent me, dried me, or changed the air around me? This is part of what researchers in plant signaling, and sometimes plant neurobiology, are really studying. Not little hidden brains inside stems, not secret thoughts. A distributed system for sensing, integrating, and responding. Leaves sense. Stems sense. Roots sense. The whole body is involved. We know these alarms are real because scientists have watched them happen. In 2018, Masatsugu Toyota, Simon Gilroy, and colleagues showed that when one leaf of Arabidopsis was damaged, a rapid calcium signal moved through the plant like an internal flare. It spread information from the wounded area to other tissues, helping prepare them for defense. That is not emotion, but it is communication. It is coordinated response. It is a body measuring disturbance and relaying it. And when disturbance crosses into real damage, the response can expand even further. Plants often increase defense hormones, such as jasminates, and release volatile compounds, airborne chemicals that can affect other parts of the same plant, and sometimes even nearby plants. You can think of it as priming, not a scream in the human sense, but a shift in readiness. That matters, because for a plant, advanced notice is everything. If you cannot run, you survive by detecting patterns early. And this is where the story of yelling becomes much bigger than one angry sentence in a kitchen. One of the clearest demonstrations came from Heidi Appel and Rex Cockcroft at the University of Missouri. They exposed Arabidopsis plants to recordings of caterpillars chewing. The plants were not actually being eaten yet. They were only receiving the vibrations associated with chewing. Even so, the plants changed their chemistry and boosted defensive responses. Just sit with that for a second. A plant can use a vibration pattern as an early warning signal. Before the bite fully lands, it may already be preparing the biochemical equivalent of armor. So no, your raised voice is not emotionally wounding the plant. But the broader principle is undeniable. Plants are not oblivious to vibration. They read it for survival, and repeated disturbance goes deeper still. Decades ago, researcher Mark Jaffe helped popularize a term that sounds technical, but describes something almost intuitive once you hear it: thigmomorphogenesis. It means plants change their growth in response to repeated physical stimulation, like touch, shaking, or wind. Brush some species over and over, and they may grow shorter, sturdier, tougher. The plant is not being dramatic. It is building for a rougher world. That matters because yelling is often not just sound. It comes bundled with the rest of human behavior. Moving the pot, tapping the leaves, pounding a nearby surface, slamming a door, creating repeated mechanical disturbance in the plant's immediate environment. The plant does not absorb the emotion. It absorbs the disturbance, and repeated disturbance can shape form. There is even evidence that some plants respond to sound patterns linked not just to danger, but to opportunity. In experiments from Tel Aviv University, Lilac Hadani and colleagues reported that evening primrose flowers changed the sugar concentration of their nectar within minutes after exposure to sounds resembling pollinator wing beats. The work is still being discussed and explored, as good science should be, but the implication is striking. For a flower, sound may sometimes signal visitors. Other researchers, including Monica Gagliano, have explored whether roots respond to certain vibration cues, though parts of that work remain debated. The details will keep evolving. The important point is that plant life may be far more mechanically and acoustically sensitive than the old image of passive greenery ever allowed. And plants do not rely on one cue at a time. They combine signals the way good witnesses do. Vibration alone may not mean much, but vibration plus tissue damage, aestus plus insect saliva, plus shifts in light, plus changes in air chemistry tells a fuller story. So a yell is only one fragment of context. Most of the time, the plant will treat it as brief background and move on. But even the ability to sort background from relevance is remarkable. A rooted organism with no ears is still dividing the world into categories that matter and categories that do not. If the word aware makes you uncomfortable here, that's healthy. We should be careful. A plant is not aware in the human sense. It is not offended by your tone the way a child would be, or soothed by reassurance the way a dog might be. But in biology, awareness can mean something simpler and more fundamental. Sensitivity, discrimination, responsiveness. The ability to detect meaningful differences and change behavior. By that standard, plants are not numb, they are exquisitely informed. This vibration is wind. That vibration is chewing. This touch is brief. That touch keeps happening. This air is dry. That air is briefly richer in carbon dioxide. This shadow passes. That shadow stays. Life depends on sorting signal from noise. And there is a deeper reason humans so often miss that. We are biased toward behaviors that resemble us. If something does not cry out, recoil, make a face, or move on command, we assume it is unbothered. We confuse visible expression with inner activity. We confuse silence with absence. But plant behavior operates on a different clock and through different channels. A tree cannot run. A monstera cannot slap your hand away. So their intelligence, if we use that word carefully, is expressed through chemistry, thresholds, growth decisions, pore openings, a root direction, and internal electrical traffic. The response is real. It is just translated into plant time. Stillness, in a plant, is not the absence of life. Often, it is life doing its work without performance. Stillness is not helplessness, it is strategy. And once you really see that, a bigger warning comes into view. The question is not just what your plant does with one angry sentence. It is what plants are forced to do in a world saturated with chronic noise and vibration. Because sound does not only affect plants directly, it can alter the entire ecological network around them. Ecologists have shown that noise pollution can ripple through plant communities, not because trees are getting their feelings hurt, but because sound reshapes the behavior of pollinators, seed dispersers, and herbivores. Clinton Francis and colleagues found that industrial noise in New Mexico changed the activity of animals around plants, which then changed pollination patterns and seed survival. That is the part people miss. A flower does not live alone with its petals. A seed does not live alone with its shell. Plant life is braided into bees, birds, bats, insects, fungi, microbes, weather, and the timing of all of them. Disturb the soundscape, and you may disturb reproduction, regeneration, and survival far beyond any single leaf. So what happens if you yell at your houseplant once? Most likely, nothing dramatic that you can see. No moral injury, no botanical heartbreak, but a burst of vibration hits the leaves. The nearby air changes. If the disturbance is loud enough or repeated enough, mechanosensory systems may register it as just one more piece of environmental data to sort, dismiss, or respond to. That answer is less magical than the idea that your fern understands insults, but it is also somehow more beautiful. Because it means the plant beside your window is not alive only when it unfurls a new leaf. It is alive in every moment, sampling, filtering, comparing, deciding what matters, and quietly preparing for whatever comes next. And if your plant is declining, the cause is usually not your tone anyway. It is more often light, water, temperature, roots, nutrients, pests, or disease. That matters because romantic myths can distract us from the plant's real signals. People worry about saying the wrong thing while ignoring the dry pot, blocked drainage, compacted soil, or heater blast. Plants are responsive? Yes. But respecting them means reading their biology, not projecting human drama onto every leaf. This is also why talking to plants sometimes seems to work, even if not for the reason people imagine. Gentle conversation does not pour love directly into chlorophyll, but people who speak to their plants usually spend more time near them. They notice droop, dust, yellowing, fungus gnats, curling edges, root crowding, and changing light. They rotate the pot, they wipe the leaves, they water before crisis. The ritual creates attention, and attention changes outcomes. In that sense, the conversation is real. It just may be working on both species at once. The plant receives care. The human regains a relationship with a living thing that is easy to overlook, and maybe that is the deepest reframe in this whole story. When people ask what happens to a plant when you yell at it, they are often asking something more human than botanical. Does living matter if it cannot answer me back? Does my presence register if I do not receive a response I recognize? Plants give a humbling answer. Yes, it registers. Just not in the language you expected. Not as wounded pride, not as comfort, as pressure, as chemistry, as a shift in air, as the arrival of another organism altering the immediate world around the leaf. The plant does not need to understand your anger to detect your existence. And that may be part of what makes plants so profound. They remind us that perception did not begin with animals. Long before there were ears, there were living cells reading the world. Long before there were voices, there were membranes sensing force and bodies adjusting to risk. So the next time you lean over a plant and it seems to do nothing, remember what you are actually looking at. A rooted organism with no face and no voice, yet with membranes that flex, pores that regulate gas, signals that race internally, defenses that can be primed by vibration, growth that can be reshaped by repeated disturbance, and a life built on interpreting cues most of us never notice. What looks passive is often just unread. The ordinary plant on your shelf is not a decorative object pretending to be alive. It is a sensory system, slowed down to plant time, quiet to us, busy to itself, and maybe that is the real surprise here. The important question was never whether a plant can take your criticism personally. It was whether we have been underestimating what a plant is. We have. The stillness fooled us. The silence fooled us. But under that silence is a body that has been negotiating with light, gravity, moisture, microbes, insects, vibration, and danger for hundreds of millions of years. So if you have ever had a moment with a plant that felt strange, intimate, or impossible to explain, tell me about it in the comments. And if you want more science-backed stories that reveal what plants are really doing beneath the surface, subscribe. There is a lot more happening in that silence than we were taught to see.